In this series of videos, we're going to be discussing GUI programming. So GUI stands for Graphical User Interface. So we'll be talking about graphical programs as well as event handling. So we're going to start out with just a basic introduction of this kind of programming. There are a lot of things that are different about GUI programming compared to traditional standalone text-based programs that run on the console. So we're going to start by talking about sort of a high-level understanding of the different components and containers, so components and characteristics that will be used inside of these GUI programs. So these programs will be made up of both containers and components. So components are graphical objects that basically display information to the user. They also potentially interact with the user. So for example, when you think about a graphical program, which is essentially any kind of program or app that you're used to running, most of the programs we use now are graphical in nature. If a program has a button that you click, or if it has a little text area that you type into, or if it has some information that's displayed to you visually, either with text or with an image, or if there's a drop down menu or a slider bar, any of these visual things that you see and interact with, all of those are examples of components. Okay, so components are used again to display information to the user, and they're also used to get information back from the user, right? So if you have a text field, a little box that you type something into, that's a visual component that you see, and also a component that allows you to give information back to the program. So these components are essentially the heart of your GUI. They're what make up your GUI. But all of these components need to go somewhere, and they basically go inside containers. So containers are sort of visual but non-visual elements that hold other components, and containers can actually also hold other containers. So when we're going to be thinking about creating these GUI programs, we want to think about what components we need, but then we also want to think about what containers we need to hold those components. So the two main types of containers that we'll use in our Java GUIs are frames and panels. So the main class we'll use for frames is JFrame. Now we're going to be talking about specifically Swing programming. Swing is a package within Java, and it's a group of graphic programs, graphic classes. For example, there are other approaches to Java graphics programming, including one called Java FX, which is newer than Swing. But we're going to still use the Swing classes for our purposes here because they're a good way, they're a good introduction to this style of programming. And a lot of the newer styles of graphic programming are kind of built off the foundation of Swing anyhow. So it's good to learn the Swing approach first, and then for those of you who want to go on and learn some of the more new and advanced styles of graphics programming, you'll have a good foundation with the Swing. So in the Swing package, all of the classes start with this J. So you'll notice this capital J at the front of a lot of the class names that we'll be using for our graphic programming. So JFrame is one of the classes we'll be using, and JFrames are a container. The JFrame is essentially the top level window that opens up. So when you run a graphic program, a little window is going to pop up that is your program. That window itself is the JFrame. Okay. Now, a frame in general is a container that just holds other components. It's just like a shell. So really the frame's job is just there to hold other things. So you need to add things to the frame in order to be able to see them. So I like to think about the frame as kind of like the outside wooden part of a window frame. It really is just a shell there. Okay. And the class we'll use for our frame is JFrame. Okay. Now, we can't add things directly to the frame. We actually need to add things to what's called the frame's content pane. And you can kind of think about the content pane as like a pane of glass that goes inside that wooden frame. So the frame is literally just sort of the outside edges. And then we get what's called the content pane. And that's sort of like the glass that goes in the middle. And that's what we're actually going to add things to. Okay, so oftentimes we'll make our GUI program actually be a frame, a special kind of frame that then we'll add containers and components to it. Okay, so there's a couple of methods that we get to use because we're going to be making classes that are frames. We get to use some of the methods that are inherited from JFrame. Um, And some of there's lots of those methods, but some of them that are really useful are set title, where we can set the title of a frame. So that'll be the title at the top little window bar. We can set the size of the frame. So that'll let us set how big we want our window to be. And then we can also use the get content pane method. This method returns to us the content pane, and that's where we're actually going to add all of our stuff. Now, in addition to frames, we'll also use panels. And in particular, we'll use the J panel class. So this is another class in the Swing package. Now, panels are also a container, but they're a little bit different from frames. So frames are, there's a difference between what's called heavyweight and lightweight containers in Swing. And that's one difference between J frames and J panels. Okay, so a frame is actually sort of controlled a little bit more by your underlying operating system. So for example, the buttons up here on the top right of your window for minimizing and maximizing and closing the size of your window, those are part of the frame. And again, they're influenced a little bit by your operating system. So those will look a little bit different on a Mac than they will on a PC. A panel, on the other hand, even though it's also a container, it's more controlled by the Java program itself. So it's less influenced by your operating system and really just influenced by your program. So I like to think about the JPanel as the actual space on which we add components or draw things. Okay, so the frame is kind of that, again, that outer wooden edge. The content pane is like the space in the middle, and the panel is sort of like the actual glass that will either draw things to or stick things on. Okay, so sometimes there's a little bit of confusion between the content pane and the panel, but hopefully once we start doing some examples, you'll kind of get the hang of how all of these things interact together. You can sort of think about it as kind of like a layering, right? So you've got that content pane there, then we're going to add a panel to it, and then we're going to add all sorts of other things onto our panel. So you can sort of think about a layering effect of how these things will work. Now, a lot of times we don't see the panel, it's just there, and it's what we add other components to. So again, there's sort of this invisible layering that's going on that we need to use. What's important to note is that we can't use a panel on its own. It has to be added to a frame. So we need to have that frame, then we need to get the content pane, and then we need to add a panel to it. So again, there's these sort of steps we need to follow that we'll do for all of our GUI programming, that then on top of that, we kind of customize for each individual program. So to use a panel, we again will create a JPanel object. We'll then add it to our frame's content pane, and then that panel is what we can add things to. So just like we got some methods to use in our for our JFrames, we also have methods we can use for JPanel. A couple of important methods are set background, so we can decide what background color we want the panel to be. And that way we can kind of see the panel. So if we make it a certain color, then we would be able to see it. And then there's also an add method. So this is what we'll use to take our other visual components like buttons and text fields and actually add them onto our panel so we can see them. Another class that's very useful is JLabel. So this is another class in our Swing package, JLabel, and it's just that, it's a label. So it's a component. Frames and panels are containers. Again, they hold components. This is the first class we're seeing that actually is a component. So labels are not interactive. They're just meant to display information to the user. So the user can't interact with the component at all. Again, it's just sort of a one-way presentation of information. A label can show the user text, it can show the user an image, or it can show the user both text and an image. There's a couple of methods that are really useful. There's set text, which allows you to send in the string you want displayed. There's set foreground, which allows you to change the color of that text that's being displayed. And then there's set icon, where you'll send in an image icon object, and that will allow you to change the image that's displayed. We'll look at an example of that in a little bit. So I'm going to introduce one more class before we go ahead and take a look at some of these things in action, and that's the color class. I introduced this early because we're going to use it a lot. You know, defining the colors of your program influences a lot about how the program looks and feels. So it's good to kind of get into the habit of using the color class early. So the class that Java gives us is just capital C color, and there's kind of two ways that you can use the color class. One is to use the constants of the color class. So for example, if I Google the Java color API, I can get to the color page. And you'll notice that there's a bunch of constants that you can use. These are all the constants that come predefined with the color class, and they even give you a little swatch here so you can see what the color is. So if you want to set the color of a panel or of a component or of text or something like that to be, you know, dark blue, you'd set it to be color dot dark blue in all caps. Okay, so these are all the constants that are given to you. There's quite a few of them. There were actually even more of them just added with Java 8. So you've got all of these options. I mean, there's a lot of colors that you can use, again, by using these color constants. But you still also have the option, even though you've got a lot of options with those constants, you can also have the option of creating your own color. So the color class also has a constructor here where you send in three double values, a red value, a green value, and a blue value. And then you can also send in a value for the opacity of the color. Okay. And this allows you to create your own color. So these three numbers refer to the red value, the green value, and the blue value of that color. So this, for example, would create a color with, 5 elements of red and 194 of green and 37 of blue. These numbers range from 0 to 255 inclusive. Okay, so this allows you to kind of play around with colors, create your own color anywhere in that spectrum. Okay, so you can use the constants or you can create your own color. Okay, so let's just look at an example. Now, for the GUI programs that you'll be writing, I've given you a GUI template file. Now, you can use this template file especially when you're new to GUI programming and you're kind of just getting into this new approach. And the template file essentially gives you the general setup of a GUI program, and then you can fill in the different components to customize and make it your own. Once you sort of get into the hang of GUI programming, you might choose to stop using the template, and that's fine. You can also continue to use the template as long as you like. Okay, so it's there as a tool to help you. You don't have to use it, but I recommend, especially if you're brand new to GUI programming, that you use it at least at the beginning. So this is what the GUI template looks like. What it is it's, again, a shell file that has some places for you to fill in. So anywhere there's these 3 question marks, those are places where you should fill in information for that particular program. There's 3 main packages that you'll import for your GUI programs: java.aut, which stands for the Abstract Windowing Toolkit, java.aut.event, which we'll use for event handling, and javax.swing. That's our swing package. That's sort of the core of our GUI packages. So for our GUI programs, the first kind of program that we'll look at, we're going to make our class a special kind of frame. So our class is going to extend the JFrame class. This allows us to say that our class, so our particular program we're going to write, is a JFrame. It's just a specific JFrame. It's a JFrame that we're going to define what that looks like. This extends JFrame allows us to inherit and use all the methods in the JFrame class. But this is still a class like any other class, so the first thing we'll do is we'll declare all of our instance data variables. Now for a GUI, those instance data variables are going to be a combination of GUI components, so things like labels, buttons, text fields, and so on. But they'll also be regular objects like strings, or maybe you have other objects that you're using, and primitives like ints, doubles, booleans, and so on. So just like any other class, this is where our instance data variables will go. And then this is the instance data variable for our content pane. Okay, so this is remember that frame is like the wooden frame of a window. The content pane is sort of the glass or the space in the middle. And then the panel is also going to be some glass, which we'll look at in a moment. So here we'll set up our constructor. So here you'll just match your constructor name to be whatever your class name is. You can use this super constructor here to modify this text and put in whatever you want the title of your program to be. Here you can set the size, so the width and height of your frame. And then this is the code where we get that content pane. So here again, I said you can use the get content pane method of the JFrame class to get that content pane object. Now here's where we create our panel. So what we're going to do is we're going to create our main panel of the JFrame class. You can change the background color. So here we'll use maybe one of our color constants to do that. And then we add the panel to the content pane. So we get the content pane from the frame, then we add our panel to it. Now, next up in the constructor is here for each one of our GUI components, we create it, we customize it if necessary, add it to the panel, and add a listener. We're going to go through all these steps in detail. So for now, I'm just showing you this is where the placeholder is. And then after or perhaps before that, depending on the program, you'll also initialize any other objects or primitive variables that you've declared, just like you would in any other class's constructor. Now, next up here is a shell for a listener class. I'm going to skip talking about this for a moment because we'll come back to this when we deal with event handling. And then finally, we have our main method. So this is a GUI program, but we want to be able to run it. So we do need a main method because that's what's going to launch when we run the program. Now, inside of the main method, there's a little bit of code here talking about event queues and invoke later. Don't worry too much about this. This syntax and the constructs that this uses is a little beyond what we're ready to talk about. But for now, this is code you can just use. Just know that this is sort of how you launch your program. And to do that, what you have to do is you have to create an object of the class you just declared. So this is where you'll put your class name, and this is where you'll put your call to the constructor you just wrote. And then there's two other lines of code you need. The first is that you need to take that frame that you just created, that object of your class, and you need to set the default close operation. Normally, when you open up a window and you touch that little X in the top right, you want the program to close, right? But that's actually not the default, so you need to specify to make that what will happen when the user clicks that X. Otherwise, the user kind of won't ever be able to close your program, and that's probably not what you want. So you need to make sure to have that line there. And then you also need to set your frame to be visible. Again, the default is that your JFrame object will not be visible, so you need to set that visibility to be true. So again, this is code you can just kind of use. Don't worry too much if it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to use this template. We're going to create our first GUI program. It's going to be a simple hello world program. Just uses a simple J label to say hello. So to use this GUI use the template, I'm going to create a new class, call it Hello World GUI. And I'm just going to take all of the code in my template, copy it, and paste it right into my Hello World GUI. And now I can go through and change all these places with the triple question mark. Now, when you're using the template, I recommend you do a first pass through to change all the question marks. Make sure the code compiles and then run it before you do any customizing for that particular program. So you want to kind of remove all these compiler errors, kind of clean up the template before you do anything else. Part of what you also want to do in cleaning up the template is get rid of these comments. So these comments are there for you to help guide you in using the template, but get rid of them so that they're not there in your final version of your program. So I just defined what my class name is. I'm going to switch that out. It's the Hello World GUI. Here, I'm going to have to come back in a moment to declare my components. I'm going to skip that for now. My constructor, I know, will be the same as the name of my class. Hello World GUI. I'm going to make the title of my window Hello World. And we'll make it, I don't know, we'll see what 100 by 100 pixels is. You can see what that looks like. Okay. I'm going to set the background color of my panel to be, let's give this one a try, wheat. That's one of our new colors from Java 8. So to use that, I will say color.wheat. Okay. Oh, maybe my class path is not finding the new Java 8. Okay, I'm just going to use one of the old colors and I'll update that in the next video. Okay, color.cyan, that's one of the original colors there. And I'm going to skip this here too, where we'll create our components. I'll come back in a moment. And then this program actually isn't going to be interactive at all. It's just going to be basically a hello world display. So for now, I'm just going to comment these lines out, but I'm going to leave them in here because we're going to come back and use them later. And then down in my main method, I need to again specify the name of the class I just wrote, Hello World GUI, and call the Hello World GUI constructor. Okay, so note that all my compiler errors went away and I can run this program, and what's going to happen is a little window is going to pop up. Nothing in that window. Oops, what did I? Yeah. Okay. because I haven't added anything yet, but there's my window. So that's what a 100 by 100 window looks like. You can see it's got the background color of cyan. That's what that light blue color is. If I extend it a little bit, you can see the title, Hello World. So that was what I'd set my title to be. Okay, so this is where you should always start in my recommendation with these GUI programs. Just run through the template first, get rid of all the compiler errors, run your program, make sure you see this basically empty window, and then you can go back in and customize for that particular program. So I'm actually going to go back and I'm going to make this a little bigger. 200 by 200. And now I'm going to go in, and what I want this program to do again is it just wanted to say hello world. So the only component we've talked about so far is JLabel, but that's enough for what I need. So I'm going to declare a private JLabel object. I'll call it hello label. So here I declare my instance data variable. Then down here in my constructor, I'm going to initialize it. So hello label gets a new JLabel. Hello world. Okay. Now I've created the label, but this just creates a Java variable. It doesn't actually create anything visually. It just creates a variable just like any other Java variable you could create. So in order to see it, I need to add it to my panel. So I can say main panel dot add hello label. So this is what I always need to do with my components. I need to create them. Then I need to add them to my panel. That's the only way I'll ever be able to see them. So now I can launch this program, and there we go. There's the little Hello World label added on to my panel. I can also do things like change. I had mentioned there was that set foreground method in the JLabel class. So for example, I can set the foreground to be color.white. And now when I run it, you can see the text is white. A little hard to see, but it gives you the idea. You can set the foreground of a label, which again changes the text to be a different color. I'm going to comment that line out just because I do think it's a little hard to see, but I'll leave it there so you get the idea. So there you go. There is your very first non-interactive but graphical program. And this is just the first step in a lot of cool graphic stuff we're going to see.